Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Abundant Thinking. Today, we are speaking to Gary Schoeniger. Gary is an entrepreneur, an author, and a speaker. He co-authored the international bestseller Who Owns the Ice House and just recently published a new book called The Entrepreneurial Mindset Advantage. His work emphasizes the redesign of how we think about entrepreneurship. He focuses on a mindset that will allow people to access their full human potential, making entrepreneurs from all over the world and from different backgrounds accessible to the success that we see all around the world. In this episode, you can expect to learn how underdogs can win, why mindset is the most important factor to success, managerial versus entrepreneurial thinking, how Gary went from broke, in debt, with a high school diploma and a drug addiction to a successful and fulfilled entrepreneur, plus much, much more. This episode was an absolute blast to record with Gary. There's a lot of really, really good wisdom for you guys to take. I know you're going to love this episode. I'll see you guys next Tuesday. Peace. Gary, how can underdogs win?
That's a big question, Elon. That's something I've been studying for more than 30 years. I've traveled all around the world, interviewing hundreds and hundreds of what I would call everyday entrepreneurs, people that start with little or nothing. They don't have big ideas. They don't have venture capital. They don't have MBAs. And my idea, and I'll back up in a second here, Elon, but the idea was like, I noticed from my own experience that everyday entrepreneurs start with nothing and they can succeed. And it's not anything other than the way they think. But here's the tricky part. It's like we succeed because of beliefs and assumptions that we are not even aware of ourselves. If that makes any sense. It's really about mindset. And I'll define that in a minute, but and you know this from podcasting, but if you ask somebody like, how did you become a successful entrepreneur? They're likely to give you answers that aren't really that helpful on the surface. I borrowed $5,000 from my mother-in-law. I love what I do. I work really hard. I never gave up. Well, okay, that's not really getting at it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so I think of myself sort of like an anthropologist. Like I dig deeper. Why? Like what's driving that? Why did you do that and not this? And what I kept noticing, Elon, was these common and predictable patterns of deeply held beliefs and taken for granted assumptions of which the entrepreneurs themselves aren't likely to be aware.
If you could create a human from scratch, what beliefs would you instill in him to maximize his chances of success?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think it would be, first of all, like knowing how easy it is to fool ourselves. I saw this great quote the other day that said something to the effect of, like people with low intelligence are easily fooled by others, and people of high intelligence are easily fooled by themselves.
I love that.
Right. And so, but I think what it comes down to at the end of the day, Elon, is like your self-efficacy beliefs. That's a fancy way of saying self-confidence. And here's the thing. Like in order to do something remarkable or meaningful, you need to be a little bit nuts. You need to be a little bit full of yourself. You need to like punch above your weight. You know what I mean? You need to reach beyond your grasp. So you got to be a little bit nuts in that regard. A little, but you also got to be humble. Like you got to have some exuberance and you got to balance that with some humility, if that makes any sense.
100%. I know I was listening to an interview that you were in, and you were talking about the self-attribution error and just this idea that people always say to themselves, like, oh, like, yeah, he can do it, but I can't. Gary, he's written a book because he's a good writer, but I can't do that because, XYZ. And this actually comes up a lot because, I'll have a podcast and people will kind of talk to me about it. And I've heard people tell me like, well, of course you're good at speaking. You have a podcast, but it works in the reverse. It's like you have the podcast and that makes you into a good speaker. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think that does stop a lot of people because they attribute the wrong things to people's success. It's like they put themselves in the spot where they were uncomfortable and they had to grow to the point where they became a good speaker or a good writer. So for those people that might attribute bad things to themselves, but oh, he could do it, but I can't. He was born this way, but I wasn't. What advice would you have for somebody to overcome this system of thinking?
Yeah, that's another good question, Elon. I would say I think it's important to like have a vision for your future. Like like Henry David Thoreau said, like go confidently in the direction of your dreams. But a lot of people never even take the time to dream, to think about what's the life I want to create for myself. You know, I'll tell you about the research on this in a minute, but I interviewed Brian Scudamore, who's the founder of 1-800 Got Junk, which he started with $1,000 when he was like 18 years old.
Yeah, great story.
And he said like it wasn't going anywhere. He was stuck. The company was, I think he said, like 8 years old. He was just puttering along. And he went and sat down at the edge of a lake on a summer day with a legal pad and just said, I'm stuck. Like, let me stop thinking about all the things I don't have, all my deficits. He was saying, like, I don't know if I love this enough. I don't know if I'm capable of, leading big teams. He was thinking all about this negative stuff. And then he just said, like, wait a minute, what could this be if I saw no limits? And he said it just started coming out of him. Like, we're going to become the FedEx of junk removal. We're going to be talked about. We're going to be on television shows. We're going to be in major cities all over North America. And he made it happen. And to get back to your question, Elon, the research is really clear here. If you have a compelling vision in your mind about something that you want to make happen, that enables you to access problem solving abilities in your subconscious mind that aren't otherwise available to you. So like to get back to your question, like you'll figure out how to be a podcaster, you'll figure out how to play a guitar, you'll figure out how to do accounting or whatever the hell you got to figure out if you have a compelling goal. And I think that's probably the single most important aspect of our mindset that differentiates the entrepreneurial from the non-entrepreneurial.
Yeah, 100%. That's an amazing answer. And I think going back to the 1-800 junk, a lot of people just look at things in the baseline. They say, yeah, well, he grew the company because of this, and I couldn't do that because of that. And you mentioned how people like don't dream and they set their goals very low for themselves. And I know that I heard you say one time that non-entrepreneurial mindset is learned. Could you expand on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, most people, like by default, we hear the word entrepreneur and we think of Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or all these big name entrepreneurs, and they look like these iconic figures, right? And they seem like mysterious to us or enigmatic. It's like we can't even fathom how they do what they do. But, in researching my new book, The Entrepreneurial Mindset Advantage, I came to understanding that human beings are like acorns, meaning that we're all born with the capacity and the desire to become a mighty oak. It's in every living thing, right? That, like, psychologists back in the day called that the master motivator. It's like if you walk outside of your house, you're going to see a little sprout trying to grow up in the asphalt crack, That self-actualizing tendency is in every living thing. But we're born into like managerial paradigms that tell us what to learn and do. Somebody else is going to tell us what to learn and do, when to work, what to work on, how to work on it. And so what I'm saying, Ilan, is that the self-actualizing tendency is thwarted by managerial paradigms that are other directed. School is other directed. Work is other directed. And what we lose sight of is the idea that the desire to fulfill human needs through our own effort is an essential part of what makes us human. And when a human being is able to pursue his or her interests and develop his or her abilities in ways that are useful to others, they unwittingly stumble into the conditions that lead to human flourishing. And so what I'm saying is I'm taking the mystery out of it. That's how underdogs win. It's they pursue the things they're interested in naturally. So work isn't work anymore, Ilan. You know what that feels like. It's like, thank God it's Monday. You don't dread getting on a podcast. You love it. And even when you're not at work, air quotes, your brain is thinking about what's my next move? How am I going to grow this thing? How am I going to build this? Whereas when you're working for somebody else, you're probably going to be, focused on using your discretionary thought and time and effort, focused on recreation and leisure. And that's it. You see what I'm saying? Like over time, that just has a huge impact. And what's so exciting about this work, Ilan, is like, this is something like the dropouts and the misfits and the C students can win. This is a game the C students can win at, There's a joke. A students become teachers that teach B students how to work for the C students. Right? So all I'm saying, to make this a little more simple, is that we're born with this self-actualizing tendency, and then we find ourselves in these other directed systems that suppress that tendency.
Yeah, going a little bit back, could you explain a little bit more in depth what you mean by the managerial paradigm? I was just a little bit confused on it.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. So that's the world we live in. It's managerial. And so if you let's look at it through the lens of culture. Like, what are the deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions of a managerial paradigm? Well, the taken for granted assumptions are something like this. Like, and it's in the minute you set foot in school, it is assumed that you are going to work in an established company. Whereas the useful thing that that company produces, the product or service, has already been established. And you will be expected to fulfill a predetermined, other directed role in that organization. That's assumed. It's never spoken, but it's assumed the minute you walk in school. And managerial assumptions are focused on efficiency, replication, right? And we need that, Alon. That's the important thing. Like, managerial paradigms are appropriate for the efficient replication and distribution of useful things into the world. But they're maladaptive for the discovery of useful things. And that's where you need an entrepreneurial mindset or paradigm.
That's very interesting. I like
you see what I'm saying? It's like the managerial mindset is appropriate in stable conditions when the useful thing is known. Like, if you invent something that's, proven to be useful to other people, at some point you have to stop inventing and start replicating that thing, and to get it out to as many people as possible. But the world is changing at such a rate that mindset is no longer efficient. That managerial mindset is no longer efficient. You now need both entrepreneurial and managerial. And so another way of saying that, Alon, is that the managerial mindset is focused on replication and distribution of useful things, whereas the managerial mindset is focused on the discovery of useful things. And they're two completely different skill sets, right? They're just totally different. And here's the problem, back to the previous question about, we're not non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. Managerial paradigms, let's say in school or at work, are so focused on efficiency, productivity, that they're intolerant of exploration and experimentation, which is what is essential. So managerial paradigms are error-reducing paradigms. Entrepreneurial paradigms are error-inducing paradigms. But if we don't acknowledge those differences, like if all you have is a hammer, then all of your problems look like nails, right? And that's why, like, people that have PhDs get stuck in jobs they don't really like. They don't know how to make themselves useful with their knowledge without the guidance of another human being. I was in Dallas a couple of weeks ago giving a talk about my new book at the Pegasus Center in Dallas, which is like an entrepreneur center funded by the Hunt family. And, I was talking about all these underdog entrepreneurs I've interviewed. And this guy stood up. He was a doctor, an MD. And he said, there's a guy here in Dallas. And I don't think he mentioned his name, but he said, there's a guy here in Dallas who's a billionaire, and I'm pretty sure he's illiterate. And I'm like, yeah, that's funny because I just met a barista in the airport who's got a master's degree. You know, it's a simple thing that, Elon. It's like your ability to make yourself useful to other humans is a source of power. It's a source of power that's available to anyone. It doesn't require money. It doesn't require you to invent anything new. It doesn't require any academic credentials. It doesn't require you to be a creative. It doesn't require you to be charismatic. It doesn't require anything you don't already have. Figure out how to make yourself more useful to more people. So the question I like to ask people sometimes is like, what's stopping you from making yourself more useful to more people? It's like, don't quit your day job. Don't mortgage your house. Don't drop out of school, but turn off the fucking TV and stop doom scrolling and start using your discretionary time to think about how you can make yourself more useful. You got a phone in your pocket. You have access to like almost all of the world's knowledge. What are you using your phone to like doom scroll for? Oh, see, now that gets to the deeper beliefs. That gets to mindset stuff. You know, if you watch somebody, Elon, and you observe them, how are they using their discretionary time? That reveals their mindset, right? I like to ask people this question. Like, do you have a compelling goal? And if not, why not? I don't need you to answer the question for me. I need you to go and think about that. Because those are questions that are designed to like excavate your deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions that you don't even know you have, and bring them up into the daylight so you can look at them. Because it's those deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions that are producing the outcomes in your life. A mindset is a belief system that is perfectly designed to create the outcomes it's creating.
Gary, I'm gonna jump in here, man, because that was amazing. I loved every second of that. First thing I want to say is I loved how earlier you mentioned between like an entrepreneurial paradigm and then managerial paradigm, and you said um, managerial is error producing and entrepreneurial is error reducing.
It's opposite. You got it
Opposite,
backwards.
opposite. That's like I was thinking that too. So I think that's so interesting because a lot of times, like within a work culture, I mean, I'm a college student, so I know in the classroom as well, people don't want to take risks because it's the bad
You
thing,
get
right? If you,
punished for it.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, your whole life you've been punished for getting the wrong answer. And that's exactly what you need. You know, I call it like micro experimentation. Like failure, school punishes failure, like the world demands it.
Yeah, totally. And I would say even for me, like having a podcast, it's so nice that I do this on my own because I get to fail very quickly. You know, I have a mentor, and one of the first things he told me was fail fast, fail forward. He's like, you need to fail as many times as you can, and that is going to push you into the right direction. And I think it's so true because when I'm in a classroom and I fail, people look at me and they're like, oh man, like, why is this guy still trying these ideas? Why can't we just play it safe and do this, right? Like, for example, so I'm a business major, and it's like, why can't we just do a SWOT analysis instead of having to do an in-depth look of, how this company's doing? Why would we want to do that? And even having this podcast, it's like, I'm going to fail so many times, but it's the only thing that's helped me succeed in anything. Nobody gets lucky the first time.
Right, right. You know, it's so interesting. Like, first of all, you're probably learning more like on your podcast than you are in school. But like, we'll save that conversation for another day. It the one way to think about this, Elon, is that like human beings are growth oriented, opportunity seeking organisms. It's like the acorn I just talked about a few minutes ago. But we're also like stability seeking, uncertainty avoiding organisms. And that creates a tension system of push and push back, right? And to your point, I think a lot of people default to the stability seeking, uncertainty avoiding side of the equation. And
They don't want to be the idiot.
they don't want to look stupid. They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to, we're social creatures. We don't want to like step out of the group norms too far. That's kind of hardwired into us. There are a lot of things that cause us to want to like group cohesion, to comply with norms. But let's go back to your mentors talking about failing forward. That's important advice. But when I think we've got to double click on that for a second, because the word failure is a big word. People hear failure, they think like, I got kicked out of school. I lost my house. I lost everything. I'm out on the street. They think of it in catastrophic terms. And what I've learned from observing these underdog entrepreneurs, Elon, is they're micro failing. It's just like try lots of things on a really small scale. It's like that's how nature works. Nature doesn't make big, bold bets. It makes lots of $5 bets. And that's what these underdog entrepreneurs are doing. And it's because they don't have access to money. If somebody said, hey, Elon, I'll give you 200 grand to open whatever business you want to open, almost guaranteed you're going to fail. The lack of money actually works to their advantage because it prevents them from fooling themselves. It forces them to start small and micro experiment until they find the right fit, and then they build on that.
Yeah, I have a school community that I run where I help people with their mindset. And recently I've been trying to do some advertisements for it, and they've been not going the best. And I remember thinking to myself that, people spend so much money on advertising, like hundreds of $1,000s a month, right? And I remember thinking, well, actually, no, first of all, I remember seeing a video and they said, hey, if you want $10,000 like funded account for advertising, like here's like a giveaway, right? You can enter it, whatever. And I remember thinking to myself, exactly to your point, man, if I had $10,000, I would fail just harder. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know what I'm doing. So I really think that I love that you said this whole idea about micro failures because these small things kind of make the eventual bigger things so much more solidified. So when you are, for example, having a bunch of podcasts and you might be, screwing up a little bit when you're speaking as a host, these small failures and these small like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that, they create this eventual success in the future and people say, "Oh dude, that sounds so effortless. Like you really sound like you know what you're talking about." But it's like,
yeah. Oh, you're
yeah,
lucky.
yeah, yeah. But it's like, man, I had to fail so many times and it was so like embarrassing. And man, when I look back on it, it was so cringy. I can't believe I said that. So people just have a false attribution. I mean, literally going back to what we were talking about, the attribution effect. And it's so apparent to me now that I'm going through this that it is everywhere that I see.
It's everywhere. And I think about this a lot. Like, what's preventing you? It's another sort of provocative question. Like, what's preventing you from creating the life you imagine? Like, people need to get serious about that question Because first of all, for most people, they don't even have a vision. They're like, I don't know, I'm going to get a job and get married and buy a house and have a car. Like they don't, they're just floating down the river. They're not really, they don't have a vision. But I think it's also important to get people to think deeper about what's stopping me. Because you'll get the surface stuff at the beginning. I don't have the time. I don't have any ideas. I don't have the know-how. I don't have the money, whatever. And you can cut through that bullshit pretty quickly. You can get, you got $5. That's enough money to start a business. Like you got like 45 minutes a day. That's enough time. You got a squeegee in a bucket. You don't need to invent anything new. You can go rent a pressure washer and make 200 grand a year. Like, you get past that stuff and then you get to the deeper, like, I'm afraid I don't have any confidence. Oh, now we're getting somewhere. Now we're getting to the real thing. But there's another important element to this, Ilan, that's worth bringing up. I want to be clear about this. I'm not advocating that you sit at home and figure out what your life's purpose is and then go do that. Like you have to just get in the arena, not knowing what the hell. And it's going to so let's go back to a managerial mindset, right? A managerial mindset tells you to know before you go. KNOW, know before you go. Make a plan, figure it all out, and then execute your plan. And if your plan doesn't work out, it's because you didn't plan well enough or you didn't execute properly, right? And look, Ilan, that's good advice if you're taking big risks. That's good advice if data exists. You should definitely look both ways before you cross the highway, right? That's managerial thinking. It's appropriate in some conditions. But what no one ever tells you is there's a different logic. It's called effectual reasoning. The managerial is causal reasoning. That's the know before you go. But entrepreneurial mindset is effectual reasoning, which is you have to go in order to know.
Wow.
And so that's where the micro experimentation comes in. Right? Ilan, when I was in my 20s, I failed at my first business, which was like a sandwich shop. I was like 25 out. Let me see. I think I was 26 or 27. Failed, broke, in debt, bankrupt, no college. I had an idea that people in wealthier neighborhoods of Cleveland, where I lived, would pay $100 to have their gutters cleaned. Clean the leaves out of gutters. Like it was fall. It was like November. Leaves are off the trees. Like I didn't write a business plan. I borrowed a ladder from a friend of mine because I didn't have the money to buy a ladder. I borrowed the goddamn ladder. I strapped on it with my car, went up in these wealthy neighborhoods where I'm not from, knocking on doors, offering to clean gutters for $100. And that's about $300 in today's money. I actually Google searched that because I put this story in my book. And I got a customer on my first day. And, I'm afraid of heights. I don't love gutter cleaning. But I started to realize, I showed up early. I stayed late. I made sure my customers were happy and they started asking me to solve other problems. And the gutter cleaning evolved into like home repair, real estate. Like I wound up like building multi-million-dollar homes. Like it took me 10 years to get there. But I started with $100 job cleaning gutters. I got to $5 million a year in revenue. I couldn't have anticipated. I needed to get in the arena and just start trying to figure out how to solve problems for other people. But here's the thing, Elon, let's go back to mindset stuff. Like, managerial mindset puts you on this path. Someone else is going to tell you what you need to learn and do in order to be successful. Right? You go to this class, you read this book, you take this in this major, and blah, blah, blah. And then you get this certificate. And that signals to an employer that you're qualified for XYZ job, right? That's all fine and good. But the entrepreneurial mindset is, you got to figure that out for yourself, right? Like, there's nobody there to tell you what's useful. And you have to step into the arena. But here's what I was trying to get to, Elon. I lost my train of thought there for a second. You graduate with an MBA, right? And you can go on LinkedIn, you can go to recruiters, you can go blah, blah, blah. You know, there's a job board. I have an MBA. That's pretty straightforward. It's like a dating site. But as an entrepreneur, like, you're trying to figure out how to make yourself useful to other humans. People aren't posting what they need on job boards. They don't even know what they need. You know? So you got to be a detective. You got to try stuff to sort of tease out what people need. It's like a whole different skill set. It's like a detective. It's not gambling. It's not fortune telling. It's like a detective. You micro experiment. You try this. I'm going to put a ladder on the roof of my car. I'm going to go knocking on doors. If I didn't get a customer on my first day, I'm probably not doing it the second day. It's just a micro experiment. What's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to waste a day.
Yeah, I think also to add on to your point, just overall a managerial mindset kind of reduces your willingness to take a risk in the first place. So for you,
100%.
you strap the ladder on your car and you're like, you know what, whatever, what's the worst that's gonna happen? I'm gonna give it a try. And you would go before you know, like you said, you didn't have any background knowledge, you just did it. And I just think that people that are have the opposite mindset, they think to themselves, yeah, but like, why would I want to do it? Or why would I want to take this risk? Why would I want to start a podcast? Only 0.1% of people do good. Why would I want to do this? And it's so easy to do that because not only is that kind of how people are taught, like you need to take, good risks. You need to make sure not to go outside of your boundaries. Don't do anything crazy because you might get fired, even though I think the downside is so much higher than the upside when you're taking big risks, especially when you're working. Because if you take a big risk and you screw it up, you can get fired. But if you take a big risk and the 1% of time that it's going to work completely, you're going to get a little bit of credibility, a little bit of knowledge, but it's not like a micro failure. You're not going to keep going. So going back to my point, I just think that if you're able to adopt a mindset where you want to take the risks, you want to go before you know, like you said, that is where all the knowledge, that's where all the expertise, that's where all the micro failures happen, and that's where you get good.
That's exactly it. I, you know, I, I told this story in my new book, Elon. I had this kid, Steve Orlando. I was experimenting back in 2006. I was volunteering to teach entrepreneurship at a local high school, just kind of as a volunteer. And one of my students, his name was Steve Orlando. I just asked the students, like, what do you like to do? And how can you make yourself useful with that? And this kid comes up with the idea that he wants to start an office cleaning business. He's a senior in high school. I'm not telling him to like analyze the office cleaning market. I'm not telling him to write a business plan. Like, that's all managerial thinking. I'm telling him go out and talk to 50 different people in the area that are having their office cleaned. Find out how much they pay, find out what they like about the service, find out what they don't like, see if you can get somebody to hire you. And every week he's like knocking on doors, talking to people. He comes back in the classroom, he's got no takers. And I'm trying to help him stay. You got to get to 50. You got to learn something. 50 is like a minimal sample size. You can't make a decision based on 5 no's. And no one's really responding to him. And I'm trying to help him. Like, look, you got to understand the deeper social and emotional dimension of people's needs. It's not just a transactional. And so, maybe the idea of having a teenager in my office unsupervised is just too scary for me. You got to anticipate that. You got to think about that from the other person's perspective. Long story short, Elon, he comes across a guy like the 37th door he knocks on. This guy is like, tell you what, kid, I don't need my office clean, but I manage strip malls all over Northeast Ohio. And we've got a company that comes in and sweeps the parking lots, but we need someone to empty the trash cans a couple times a week, pick up the like litter in the landscaping beds, just could you do that? He's like, hell yes. Comes back in the classroom, scratches out office cleaning, writes in parking lot cleaning. Could have never anticipated that. You got to get in the arena. Right? So that's the kid made 40 grand in his spare time while he was a high school senior. His dad called me up one day and goes, hey, is there any way I could take this course? He was like, he saw the change in his kid. Not only the money was making, but his attitude, So then like 2008 happens, the market crash happens, and the parking lot cleaning thing is starting to fall apart. But he's now got a reputation, and the same guy to ask him, hey, I rent this little like space out to a light manufacturing company. The guy's going out of business. Would you go over there and clean up the building so I can rent it out again? And Steve goes over there, he's cleaning up, blah, blah, blah. And the guy who's going out of business asks him, hey, how much would you give me for this forklift? Steve's like 19 at this point. He's like, I don't know, $500. Guy goes, okay, fine, $500. Steve looks on his phone, like in a matter of 24 hours, sells it for $1,500. Goes to his buddy and goes, I wonder if we could do that again. I wonder if there's a business to be had from buying and selling used forklifts. Elon, they each put $35 in a bank account, created an LLC. They've done 68 million in revenue buying and selling forklifts all over the world. That really convinced me that your original idea doesn't even matter. You got to get in the arena and start trying to solve problems for other people. And opportunities will show up. Opportunities that are otherwise invisible to you. They're not on a job board. They don't exist anywhere. You know what I'm saying? So the taking of risk is like knocking on doors and have people just tell you no. Those are the micro failures that I'm talking about.
Yeah, 100%. Wow, what an amazing story. That's amazing. And I'm sure you're very proud of him and you were his teacher. So I I would tell you to have a lot of respect for yourself as well, if you don't already, for creating the person that that guy is today. Yeah, wow, that's amazing. I would say all it takes is one. Like all you really need is one opportunity. And I resonate a lot with what you were saying about just trying a lot of different things and the opportunities coming up because like along the way, a lot of people, even going back, a lot of people will make long-term plans for themselves. You were saying how this guy, um, he started knocking on doors, he didn't buy any equipment. And making a long-term goal when you're starting is so hard because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. You don't know what it entails. And it was the same thing for podcasting. So when I first started, I told myself, okay, I am going to do this thing for 2 years without ever asking if it's for me or not, whether or not I'm going to like it. I mean, I love it, but
Yep.
so I got into it and I was like, trying to see what I really want to make a podcast about. I interviewed a lot of different people. And then over time, I would get guests that I never thought would come onto the show. I mean, even somebody like you, I love how you think. Just having this conversation with you is so enlightening to me and makes me feel so good because one of my biggest goals in life is being surrounded by more people who think like you, people that are very optimistic, people that want good for themselves because, you know, nowadays a lot of people have kind of just lost hope. It's kind of sad to see. And um yeah, I'm very thankful for everything that's come to me. And it's just, man, the opportunity, I would never have thought the things that I would have talked about with the people I would have talked about on this podcast would ever happen. I had Chris Voss on my podcast. He's like huge FBI negotiator. He's been on some of the best podcasts in the world. And it's like, dude, I don't know. It's just crazy. I'm not gonna keep rambling, but
No,
I
I get
know,
it. Like I know what I think I know what you're trying to get at, Ilana. It's like you're taking a risk when you ask the FBI negotiator. I know who you're talking about, Chris Vaughn. I know what that feels like because you're making yourself vulnerable. And everyone, like most of the people you ask are probably not responding to you, but every once in a while they do. And that's changing you. That's changing your mindset. And that's another point that's important here, Elon. Like the entrepreneurial mindset is not the cause of entrepreneurial behavior, it's an effect. The cause of entrepreneurial behavior is the acorn, it's the self actualizing tendency. There's something in you that's telling you this traditional path of going to school and getting an MBA and getting a job isn't going to cut it for me. You'll develop an entrepreneurial mindset by taking lots of risks and learning from the result over time.
yeah. And I was talking to one of my friends one time. I was eating with him and he was talking about how I did have Chris Voss on the show, and he was like, "Yeah, how'd you even get in contact with him, whatever?" And I told him, "I'm like, yeah, I kind of just reached out to his team. Then 6 months later, they reached back out to me, and then I made an appointment 5 months after that because this guy's so busy." And he told me something that kind of stuck with me because it was crazy for me to think about. He looked at me and he was like, "Oh, like, is that something you do? Do you like, reach out to people?" And I was thinking, I'm like, by the time that I like asked Chris to be on my podcast, I probably reached out to hundreds of people, and the only ones that people see are the successes, right? So people might be like, "Oh, that's cool. He had Gary on his podcast. That's awesome. Maybe he's lucky, whatever." But exactly, nobody sees when people don't respond. Nobody sees when people say no, and I think something that was super powerful that I resonated with your story about your student is you said just go to 50 people. Like that's all it is. 50 people and then you could know if it's for you or not. You can decide if you want to keep going. But it's about repeatedly putting yourself in the position to fail. I really think that's where a lot of the power comes from.
100%. 100%. But again, it's micro failure. That's the key. It's not big, it's not jumping off a cliff. It's just knocking on doors. It's sending an email.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing at the surface people see, oh, Elon had Gary on his podcast, but people don't think, oh, Elon had Gary on his podcast, but he reached out to 400 people in total that didn't say anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the 399 people never even responded to him. That's right there. That's the secret. It's like you just keep trying stuff and learning from the results. And I use this word self-efficacy. And I've studied this. This is one of the most prominent psychologists of the 20th century. His name was Albert Bandura. He just died a couple years ago. And he wrote about this, Elon, like people with high sense of self-efficacy, they set high goals for themselves. They don't give up easily in the face of challenges and setbacks. They relish the challenge. And these people tend to flourish. They tend to experience life as fulfilling. They tend to experience psychological well-being, lifelong growth, and so forth. Whereas people with lower self-efficacy tend to set low goals for themselves. And they tend to give up easily in the face of challenges and setbacks, right? And these people are prone to like anxiety and depression and all manner of addiction and other problems. But here's the thing, it's like most people aren't aware of the ways in which their deeply held beliefs impact their behavior. They're just not aware of it. They just get up and do today what they did yesterday. They don't set high goals for themselves. They don't go knocking on doors. They don't ask Chris Voss to be on their podcast. I remember this, Alon. I remember when I was evolving from gutter cleaning to handyman, I convinced this super wealthy dude to sign over like, I don't know, must have been like $1 million piece of property to me with zero down, nothing. I had nothing. I was a gutter cleaner. And I went to this guy and I noticed that he had all these building lots for sale. And I offered to give him his asking price plus like a 10% premium if he would sign over the whole thing to me. And I would build a model home on one. And then every time I sold the home, I would go to the next one and roll right down the street. And I remember being in this guy's office and he was super wealthy. He had pictures of him like with celebrities golfing and shit. I was intimidated out of my mind. High school diploma, failed in business before. I'm just like, in my late 20s. You ever been so scared like your teeth are sticking to your lips, right? You can't, like a cotton mouth. And the dude just goes, okay. And I was like, but I had to talk myself, even to go into the meeting, I had to tell myself the worst that can happen is this guy's going to tell me to get lost. Sorry, get out of here. Have a nice day. Like, that's not going to kill me. That's not going to hurt me. I ain't going to jail. Nobody got hurt. I'm going to be embarrassed. Guy goes, okay. Then I had to like draw up an agreement. I had like a friend do it. It was a lawyer, did it for like $1,000 or something. Wrote up an agreement. I came back to his office a couple of weeks later and he's signing the agreement, Elon. And I never forget this. He looked up at me halfway through he's signing. He looks at me dead on and he goes, I'm doing this for you because somebody helped me when I was getting started.
Wow.
That's what happens when you put yourself out there. That's what Chris Vaughn saw in you. You're a young guy making stuff happen in the world. Like, let's help this guy. People don't take that into account. A lot of successful people, they got successful other people. They started somewhere and other people helped them. And for people like you, you're out there hustling, knocking on doors, trying to make stuff happen, going above and beyond. Every once in a while, someone's going to go, yeah, I'm going to help you because somebody helped me.
Yeah, I think luck finds you when you do something so many times. So people will say you got lucky for doing something, but it's like, yeah, I got lucky. I had 100 tries at this thing. I reached out to 100 people. I got lucky that one of them reached back to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm sure you follow Naval Ravikant.
Oh yeah.
you know, he talked about luck, like there's four kinds of luck. Did you read that?
I read his, yeah, I know he has a thread about luck and how to get wealthy, like not by luck.
Without being lucky.
Yes,
Right.
yes, yes, yes.
Right. But like what he talks about, like there's random luck. Like you're walking down the street, you find $100 bill. Like it's just totally random. Okay, that's luck. Right. But the second kind of luck he calls like hustle luck. It's what you talked about. You're knocking on doors, and most of those doors aren't even responding to you at all. Every once in a while, somebody does. That's hustle luck. And the third kind of luck he talks about is like you start to develop domain expertise and you can see opportunities other people can't. That's the third kind of luck. And you start to realize that's not luck anymore. But then the fourth kind of luck is like reputational. It's like you build a brand of being reliable and trustworthy, and people want to work with you, and opportunities start coming to you. You don't even have to go looking for them anymore. That's luck you just created. It's no longer luck.
Yeah, I was so just kind of going back a little bit, just to make sure I'm understanding this right. So the guy gave you $1 million down for you to build the different properties. Is that, am I
Mm-hmm.
understand that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I
Yeah.
just want to make sure I got that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
He
incredible.
signed over to me the rights to $1 million worth of real estate.
Gotcha. For you to build the house.
Yeah. Like with no money down. I had no money down. But the point is, like I knew that this was the early '90s, and like there was a recession happening, and he was having trouble selling these lots. And you know how I figured that out? I drove by this place almost every day, and I saw the sign like overgrown and faded. And so this gets back to the entrepreneurial mindset point that I want to make, Alon. It's about understanding how to solve other people's problems. Like people miss opportunities every minute of every day because they're focused on getting their own needs met. That's the simple secret that's hiding in plain sight. I talked about that in my first book, Who Owns the Ice House? You're going to miss opportunities 5 times a day because you're trying to get your own needs met. And the simple secret is the minute you realize, like, this is about solving problems for other people, opportunities will start to appear everywhere.
Yeah, I hear a lot of overlap between business people like that as well. They always say like it's about helping other people, and that's
It's
really where
totally about helping other people.
yeah, it's where the power comes from. Because also like not only do people want to pay for that, but I think in a way you feel good as well. Like it seems like more of a higher uh I guess higher level of achievement when you're helping yourself and other people at the same time.
Well, you're onto it, Alon. You tap into the most potent form of human motivation. It's called intrinsic motivation. Like we're hard coded to want to solve problems for other people through our own efforts. Like that's coded into us. And that enables us to tap into this very, very potent form of motivation that is almost impossible to tap into when you're just going to work every day and doing a job.
Sure. Okay, so for people that might be in that position, right? Somebody might be working a 9 to 5, they might be not too happy. And I will say, I guess, as like a testament of my own, one of my worst fears, the more, and I'm only 19 years old, but the more I'm living, one of my worst fears that I could see for myself is being in a position where I might be working a 9 to 5 that I just absolutely hate with all my life. So what is some piece of advice you could give to people that are in that situation on how to get out?
Hmm.
Or at least help
Well,
yourself. Yeah.
yeah, first of all, let's talk about that for a second, Elon. a lot of people fall into this trap. And again, these are societal pressures. Your parents push you down the college path. Go get a degree and get a safe job. Go get that, consulting job. Go get that job at Accenture that pays six figures right out of college. And, you get that job, and then you're all proud of yourself, and you buy the Tesla to show off to your mates, like, whatever. Then you meet a girl and you buy a house and you have, kid, and you wind up 30 years old or something. You're like, something inside you gnawing away. It's like there's an emptiness. And you don't even let that really come up. You drown it with sports or social media or whatever. But there's a voice and it keeps coming up, right? It's like this ain't getting it. But everybody else is doing it. So you start thinking, I must be something wrong with me. Because everybody else, you start comparing your insides to everybody else's outsides. And you somehow wind up at 40 years old with an underlying assumption that the world is the way it is, and I am who I am, and there's nothing I can do about it. Right? So it's an easy trap to fall into. And so what I would say to a 19-year-old person who's in college is pay attention to that inner voice. I would actually say, take time to meditate, to write down and think about what's the life you want to create for yourself. If you could see no limits, like Brian Schoeniger said, how can you make yourself useful? What are your gifts? I gave a talk at UT Arlington a few weeks ago, and there were a group of students in the lecture hall, and they came over to me after the talk, and I said to them, like, look, you come into this world with gifts, and they're hard-coded in you. You don't pick them. There's things that you're interested in things that you're capable of becoming really good at. And they're already hard-coded in you. You don't get to choose those things. And no one ever tells you this in school, Ilan. And I said this to these kids in Arlington. It's up to you to figure out how to make yourself, to use those gifts to make yourself useful to other humans. And the more useful you become, the better off you're going to be. And if you don't honor your gifts in that way, you're going to be unhappy all the days of your life. You will suffer. But here's the thing, Ilan. Your community will also suffer because they won't receive your gift.
Very interesting.
So now do you maybe have a better understanding of a managerial paradigm? Doesn't honor those gifts. It tells you to suck it up and try to make as much money as you can doing something that you probably don't love to do in a way that you don't love to do it. And so I'm not telling you to drop out of school, Ilan. I'm telling you to honor your gift. And you're in university right now, suck every drop out of that you possibly can. Don't let the teacher determine what you learn and how far you go. Like, it's an amazing opportunity to learn how to make yourself as useful as possible to as many people as possible. That's how you're going to flourish.
Yeah. Do you have any recommended? I'm a big book guy. Do you have any recommended books for somebody in my position to read?
Well, I'm going to start with my first book, Who Owns the Ice House? 8 Life Lessons from an Unlikely Entrepreneur. That's one story, but it distills these 8 concepts that I gleaned from about 200 entrepreneurs that I interviewed across the United States. My second book, The Entrepreneurial Mindset Advantage, is a deeper dive, a little more research based there. But away from my books, one book I read recently that really blew my mind is a book by Abraham Maslow called The Further Reaches of Human Nature. And you know, he talks a lot about some of the things we've talked about here, about how we fear greatness almost to the same extent that we fear ruin. We're afraid of being, he called it the Jonas complex, some biblical reference I don't quite understand. I'm not a religious person. But that's a really good book. Let me look in my, I'm an Audible guy. I'm listening to Audible like I'm in the gym every day. You know, I was thinking about this in the new year, Lon. I'm 65 years old. I swam more than 200 miles this year. I've ran like 600 miles this
Wow.
year. Let me look in my, let me see if I got any better recommendations here. The Further Reaches of Human Nature, Abraham Maslow. I absolutely love that book. The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath is also a good one. I got so many books in here. I don't want to overwhelm you with book recommendations. But I think the broader point, Elon, is what do you like? Why aren't you learning? You know, I was in an Uber in South Africa last spring in Johannesburg, and I get in the Uber car and I'm driving, I'm talking to this kid, and I asked him to turn the air conditioning on. He was like, sorry, my air conditioning doesn't work. He's like apologetic. I'm like, no problem. Don't worry about it. And I started talking to him like, why don't you turn this Uber car into a university? Like, why don't you ask every single person that gets in that car to tell you one thing that someone taught them that made a positive impact in their life, one lesson, and write it down in a journal and make that into a book in 5 years. And then when you don't have anybody in the car, get yourself an Audible prescription and subscription and start listening to like nonfiction. You can turn any situation. It all comes back to mindset, Elon. There's opportunity everywhere. Knowledge is at your fingertips. Why aren't you accessing it? Those are the underlying beliefs and assumptions that are worthy of thinking about. It's all
Yeah.
mindset. It's all, I say this, Elon, you know, I've interviewed 600 or 700 entrepreneurs all over the world. My work is 99% mindset, it's 1% entrepreneurship. I'm just trying to get people to realize that your mindset, your underlying beliefs that you're not really aware of, are creating the outcomes in your life. If you can just get somebody to that point, you're 99 yards down the field. To just start thinking about your own thinking. How might I be contributing to outcomes that I say that I don't want? And then the last 1% is like, here are some of the deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions of successful entrepreneurs. It's like a buffet table. Now go over there and take whatever you want from that buffet table. You know what I mean? And bring your beliefs up into the daylight and look at them and go, you know what? This one I don't need anymore. Let me replace it with a more effective belief. You're already on that path, Ilan. You're 19 years old. Like, by virtue of the fact that you're doing this podcast while you're in college tells me everything I need to know. Like, you're going to,
Thank you for the words.
here's what it comes down to, Ilan. I could summarize, I've interviewed entrepreneurs in South Africa, South America, North America, Canada, Eastern Europe, Russia, Australia. It comes down, I could summarize it for you in 2 sentences, one sentence with a comma in the middle. The
Sure.
people who are looking for answers, find them. And the people who aren't, don't. That's it. It's
Yeah,
nothing
that's
more
awesome.
complicated than that. Are you looking for answers or aren't you? Or are you just looking for entertainment and leisure? Are you just looking for like the next doom scroll or the next, bullshit feed on your social media? Like, if you're not looking for answers, you ain't going to find them.
Sure. I love that. That's awesome. One of my biggest beliefs is, and I said this on my podcast, is this fact that exactly what you were saying about how 99% of you is mindset, then 1% is entrepreneurship. Similarly, I say like things like starting a business, being successful in a job, literally anything, the things that they all have in common is having a good mindset. Because if you don't have a mindset, you could be the best writer in the world, but if you don't have a mindset, a good mindset with consistency and discipline, nobody's ever going to know about your work because you're never going to write.
Whereas like a shitty writer like myself can excel, and I don't want to say I'm a shitty writer, but the point, it's like this, like, if you got something to say, you'll figure out how to play the guitar. Or maybe you're just a good guitar player, but you got nothing to say. Nobody wants to hear you. You're just an entertainer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
And that's how I think about it. Like, you got to figure out what your gifts are, but you can't figure that out by sitting at home. You got to get out in the world and start interacting with the world. You got to try things. You got to, you know, I should probably mention this before we wind down, but I define entrepreneurship as the self-directed pursuit of opportunities to create value for others. And by creating value for others, we empower ourselves. And here's why I like that definition. It took me about 25 years to come up with that. Because you can apply that way of thinking to a minimum wage job at Taco Bell. Show up 20 minutes early, stay 20 minutes late, and watch how fast opportunity finds you. It's just that simple. It's a way of thinking about entrepreneurship that anyone can embrace it, whether you take a traditional career path or you start something of your own. There's a lot of space in between.
Yeah, something I think you're going to find interesting is with your definition of entrepreneurship being the self-directed pursuit of opportunities to create values for others. As far as opportunities go, there was a study done and they found that people who are optimistic and positive tended to find more positive things and opportunities present themselves. So what they did is there was this huge article, and you had to figure out how many paragraphs, how many words, something like that. I don't know exactly. I don't want to, butcher it, but you had to find how many X is in this entire paper. And there was this tiny print that said, "Stop reading. This is the answer," and it just listed. So then the people who found it, they just say, okay, 42. That's it. Like I know the answer. And they found that I forgot what the number was, but 100% of the people who were positive and optimistic found this opportunity, and none of the people that were negative found it, which I thought was so interesting. And going back to what I was talking about with my mentor, so I'm in a business organization on campus, and the guy who's my business mentor now, he went to do like a classroom speaking. And he was talking about AI, and there were people around me who were asking him some questions. Some people ask questions just to ask a question. Like I don't understand why they ask these questions, but I was like, okay, I really want to learn about this guy on a deeper level. So when he finished, he went outside and I went outside behind him, and I told the girl that was supposed to like escort him to his car, I'm like, hey, like I'll do that for you. I'll do it for him. Don't worry about it. She's like, are you sure? Whatever, it doesn't matter. So I ended up talking to this guy, and man, it's like this small thing, this guy who was a classroom speaker turned into somebody that I would have coffee with, that I would talk to, and he would give me such amazing pieces of advice. So I think opportunities are out there, but people never see them exactly how you said. What what are some things that people could do to actually like see opportunities, to be mentally available? Because people are literally blind. Like you were saying, there are so many opportunities that we have every day, but people don't tend to see them.
I'll tell you. I'll tell you. I have a friend who's a retired Marine Corps Special Forces sniper, Iraq, Afghanistan veteran, certified badass.
Wow.
He told me this story once that um, he was training at Coronado Island, like with the Navy SEALs, and freezing his ass off. He's like 6'5", like rail thin guy, right? And he said he was jackhammering, which is like a military term for like I'm shaking uncontrollably. I'm so cold. And the commanding officer, the training guy comes up to him and goes, "You're going to get people killed, and you're shivering like that because you're focused on yourself. Focus outward." And the shivering stopped. That's what I'm coming back to, Alon. You're going to miss opportunity because you're only focused on what you need. And the minute you start focusing on how could I be of service to other people, how could I make myself more useful in whatever situation I'm in, that's how you're going to flourish.
Right, which is part of your definition for entrepreneurship, to create values for others.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not born to like just go to a job and like do what somebody else tells us to do in exchange for a paycheck. Like that's not natural.
Sure. Yeah. What, in your words, what is the entrepreneurial mindset advantage? You titled your book that. If you could describe it, what would you say?
I think it's just the idea that there's nothing preventing you from making yourself more useful to more people. You don't need somebody else to tell you what to learn and do to make yourself useful. And once you realize that it's up to me to figure out how to make myself useful, to use my gifts to make myself useful to other humans, the world is just open to you. There's unlimited opportunity. There's unlimited demand for people that think that way. There's lots of reasons not to think that way. That's also what's in that book, is all the ways in which these subtle situational factors can thwart that tendency, right? So you got to be aware of how to create the conditions. Surround yourself with the right people, curate the right beliefs that lead to flourishing. That's how underdogs win.
Gary, are you happy?
That's a great question, but I wouldn't say happy is the right word, because happy implies I'm always like
Go
smiley.
lucky. Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah, it's I feel like I'm flourishing. You know, I'm a recovering alcoholic drug addict with a high school diploma. I do what I get. I love to do. I travel all over the world. I live in a beautiful home. I feel fulfilled. My life is an exciting adventure. Like there's not much distinction between work and play for me. It's all the same thing. I'm constantly reading. I was at the gym this morning, you know. I I I'm learning all the time. I'm growing. So I feel like I'm flourishing. And I feel like if I drop dead tomorrow, like I used my gifts to create value for other people. I figured out how to do that. So in that sense, I feel fulfilled.
Yes, that was gonna be my follow-up question. Instead of happy, I would have said replace it with fulfilled. What would you say your gifts are?
Hmm. I think I don't know, you know, that's kind of funny. Like I I like fixing things. I like problem solving. I think I have a natural ability as a public speaker. Like I can stand up on a stage and convey ideas in a way that's impactful. But I only deploy those skills because I feel like I have something important to say. Like I'm not just a motivational speaker. You know what I mean? I don't
Sure.
like that term. I feel like I went on this journey more than 30 years ago to try to deconstruct the entrepreneurial mindset and in a way that could be useful to other humans. And I feel like I stumbled into something that's way bigger than me. And I don't know. I'm using my gifts, you know. Maybe if I was better at doing something else, I would take it in a different direction. But I enjoy public speaking. I have a podcast of my own. I mean, I get to travel around the world and train thousands of people how to cultivate entrepreneurial mindset in others. So I feel like I am using those gifts to create value.
Gary, man, what a journey it's been. I want to thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you? Podcast, books, links, everything.
Yeah. So um GarySchoeniger.com, and I'll send you all this stuff. You can put it in the show notes, is my author website. My company is the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. It's ELImindset.com, ELI mindset.com. We've trained thousands of people how to cultivate entrepreneurial thinking in classrooms and communities all over the world. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on, I don't do a lot on Twitter anymore, Facebook, whatever. But I'm out there. You can Google search my name. I'm everywhere.